It's time to increase your bankroll by decreasing your daily fantasy sports learning curve. The Curve with Benny Ricciardi and Josh Kalashi starts now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Curve here at rotocurve.com. My name is Benny Ricciardi. I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites, and I'm here to walk you through the first part of our show today. We're going to start with the recap of yesterday's action. No, there were a lot of upset people with some of the pitching performances we had out there. A lot of people were on Archer. He was one of the guys we discussed here yesterday. I know Mike Rathburn was big on him yesterday, and he probably had the best day out of anybody. So he was definitely a good start. Some of the other guys we mentioned, guys like Scherzer, guys like Syndergaard, they did not have good days today, which we'll get into in a minute as well. And, they were guys that sunk a lot of rosters for people. We're going to kind of consolidate some of the stuff for the show today. We're going to wrap the weather and the Vegas lines and the pitching all together and kind of discuss them all at once. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about yesterday's action. As I said, it wasn't really a high-scoring night on any of the sites. The cash line for the moonshot yesterday was only like 113, which is pretty low. And there were some of the big 50-50s out there, the $1 to $3 50-50s. The cash line was only about 100 yesterday, which for DraftKings is a little bit low. It wasn't horrible because a lot of those people did have Archer up top. And basically, if you didn't have Archer, you didn't cash yesterday. I mean, his performance was dominant. He was the best pitcher on the day, wound up with 46 fantasy points. And yesterday was a lot about avoiding some of the landmines as well. Guys like Greinke got lit up. Scherzer got lit up. Noah Syndergaard got lit up. So there were a couple guys who we expected a lot more out of that wound up with low scores yesterday. But if you had Archer on your single pitcher sites, if you used them over on FanDuel, I think he wound up with 26 FanDuel points. So that was an amazing performance out of him. Even with a price close to $10,000, he still paid that off and then some for you. So you really couldn't be upset if he was one of the guys that you decided to use. Let's see what else we had here. Lance Lynn was pretty good last night. He had 28 DraftKings points. He was up on a lot of the top rosters when we looked at the final scores in the Moonshot, which is the largest field GPP that they have on DraftKings. People ask me why I always track the Moonshot, but that's actually the reason why, because it's the largest field tournament that you have. And as Rath discussed this morning, it's good to know how to win a tournament like that, because when they do have these big $1 million prize pools, the tournament is usually much bigger than the average size. You usually get like $150,000 payoff pitch every day. So, you're talking a $27 entry, you're talking, 4,000 to 6,000 people in most of those tournaments. But when a $27 $1 million tournament rolls around on DraftKings, you're talking probably about 10 times that in the pool. You're going from $100,000 prize pool to $1 million. So you really need to know how to win a tournament of that size. And like we said, it's not always a pure stack that winds up taking those down. And if you looked at the big 100K moonshot yesterday that had 30,000 entries, you'll realize that it wasn't a pure stack that wound up taking it down. We had 4 of the top 10 rosters did use 6-man stacks, but the top roster was only a stack of 3 guys. He picked the 3 right hitters on that Dodgers team, and then had guys like Logan Forsythe. I think he had Evan Gattis as well. A couple of the guys at other positions who wound up having huge games. And that's actually the way he differentiated his roster and got to the top of the, basically to the top of the heap and won the big prize yesterday. Talking about some of the other things that happened yesterday, basically all the winning rosters in the top 10 on FanDuel and DraftKings all had Chris Archer on them. So like I said, if you didn't have Archer, you probably didn't cash. If you didn't have him in your 50-50s, it didn't matter what your bats really did, because you weren't going to make up the amount of points he had versus everybody else out there. Lance Lynn, like I said, was a solid start, but he was very low owned. The guys that were highly owned, the Greinkes, the Scherzers, even Syndergaard, who was a little bit cheaper, but a lot of people were on him after his last performance. These guys ate up close to 50% of some of the pools in 50-50s and some of the big tournaments. So if you had Archer instead of these guys, you basically had yourself into the money already in the 50-50s and put yourself in a good position to cash in all the tournaments you were in. The chalk stack actually wound up hitting yesterday. That was the LA Dodgers. Again, like we said, if you could figure out who was going to play in that late game, it was a good idea to throw them in your lineup. We had guys like Gonzo, Peterson, Kiki Hernandez, who had a home run on the second at bat of the game. Jimmy Rollins, all those guys finished with 20-something points. So if you had any combination of some of those guys in your lineup, you probably wound up pretty well. The winning lineups on FanDuel seem to have a lot of Archer on top and a lot of those stacks of those Dodgers bats. The winning lineups on DraftKings, I mean, basically all of them had a couple, even the ones that only had, as we said, it wasn't pure stacks, but even the ones that had like 3 or 4 players from a team, the Dodgers was basically the team they had 3 or 4 players on. And almost everybody had Jock, almost everybody had Adrian Gonzalez. A lot of people had Kiki Hernandez to try to save some money. So again, if you had all those guys, you got all those home runs, all those points, there was a good chance that was going to push you up on the roster. Just having those 3 guys with Archer on your roster gave you 100 points over on DraftKings last night. Actually, close to 110 points over on DraftKings last night. So if you had those guys in your 50-50, you were above the cash line in your 50-50. And if you played them in your tournaments, like I said, the Moonshot cash line was 113. So you basically needed 3 points out of the rest of your roster to get yourself over the hump there. So that's basically the recap of last night. That's some of the stuff that we saw. There's a couple other bats I wanted to mention, guys like Evan Gattis, who had a big game. Logan Forsythe, you guys know I mention him a lot whenever he's going up against left-handed pitching. He's eligible to be used at second or third base, and for some reason his price stays stubbornly low, despite the fact that he's hitting cleanup basically against left-handed pitching for Tampa Bay. So, it's getting to that point in the season now where there's certain things that should pop out at you guys right away. Stuff that we talk about, we mention all the time. High strikeout pitchers against the Cubs and the Astros, right-handed pitchers against the Cubs and the Astros that have a lot of high strikeouts. Things like a guy like Logan Forsythe against left-handed pitching, things like Altuve against left-handed pitching. Something that we're going to talk about today with guys like, Tulo or Stanton against left-handed pitching. I mean, certain things should just pop out at you right away as, wow, great matchup. I got to make sure I look deeper into this guy and get him in my lineup. And, it actually makes your research go a lot faster. When I first started at the beginning of the season, it took a lot longer to see what trends were emerging. But now that you see them, they're very easy to spot when you see guys in good matchups. We're going to have an article coming out later this week where I kind of outline some of those guys for you, basically through the first 2 months of the season, what things are popping out as this is a team you should target. This is a guy you should target against this type of pitching. This is a pitcher you should target against this type of team. And this way, it'll help you guys narrow down some of your research. Just a quick little cheat sheet for you. So let's transition on. Let's talk a little bit about today's games. As I said, we're going to kind of mesh everything together to save some time with the Vegas lines and the weather and everything. So bear with me, and I'll mention it. I'll mention a couple issues that you guys are going to have to be aware of as we go along. First thing that popped out at me at the Vegas lines, obviously, is going to be the game in Coors Field today. Dodgers in Colorado. It's a 10.5-run game. Features a matchup between, I think it's Bettis going for Colorado, the young right-hander, and he's going up against Mike Bolsinger for the Dodgers, who's actually been surprisingly good. If it was any other ballpark today, I would probably say that Bolsinger was in play. All his numbers actually look pretty good today. But again, in Colorado, you want to shy away from him. I mean, Kershaw had a decent start over there, not great. Greinke kind of got knocked around a little bit yesterday. So, you're not going to come down to one of the lesser pitchers on the team and use him in that same spot. Let's see. We want all those Dodgers lefties going up against Bettis today. So if Peterson's in there, if Gonzalez is in there, Rollins, Ethier, Grandal, everybody always asks me, hey, what stacks do you like today? I mean, I know it's going to be chalky, and I know you're not going to be the only one on it. But, again, I mean, there were people rolling out the Dodger stack yesterday in cash games. And, the way that Dodger stack performed yesterday, it didn't matter who else you had. If you didn't have the Dodger stack and you were going up against it, there's a good chance that you probably lost your games yesterday, as I did to more than one person. But the big problem here with using these Dodgers bats that I want to make sure everybody is aware of is there's a big potential rain issue in that Colorado game. Right now, they're looking at about an 81% chance of showers. So that's not a small probability. I mean, this is a game that's going to be, one that comes down to the wire. Now, the problem is it's a late start game. It's an 8-10 game. So you might not know for sure if this game's going to go off when your lineups lock at 7 o'clock. Basically, that's going to bring us to our teaching point today on how do we handle this situation. So on DK, I think it's pretty easy for you. You want to have exposure to this Dodgers game. There are probably about 6. I think there's 11 games on the slate tonight. I think there are 6 of them that are starting at 8:05 or later. So if you want, you could throw, whatever guys you think you have to have in that early game, put them in there and put in, the Dodgers bats that you want to have in your lineup. You can come back and check up until about 8 o'clock and see if they're saying that the game is going to be risky at that point in time. We'll have a lineup made already that you have as your backup, where you say, okay, if this game doesn't go off, this is the lineup that I'm going to go with that fits those same guys that, I had in the early start games in, and takes out all those Dodgers bats. Here's who I would replace them with. Put it in the $0 free entry tournament on DraftKings. This way you have it saved on your system. So at 8 o'clock, if you decide I can't go with any of these Dodgers bats, it's just a simple matter of exporting that other lineup that you had to the side over to all the lineups that you were going to use for your games here today with the Dodgers bats. So that's probably the way to handle it tonight, because, it might go down to the wire where you don't have it. But with a game like this having such a high run total compared to all the rest of the games, if it does go off and you don't have exposure to it, it's probably going to kill your lineup. Now, over on FanDuel, obviously we talk about this all the time, but if it's still an issue at 7 o'clock, whether or not this game is going to be played, you cannot have these guys in your cash game. So as great a situation as all those Dodgers lefties are in, if it looks like that game might not play, you have to get them out of your cash game lineup. If you think that that's going to be a problem for you, there's a simple solution to that as well. Don't play heavy cash games tonight. Only play a couple of them. Only put a couple of them in, where if you have to make a late switch to something, again, have that backup plan in place. But if you have to make the late switch, you don't have to worry so much about, which way you want to go with it, because you have so much money on the line. Play a couple less games than you normally would. If you really want to take a chance, as we always say, excuse me, the best way to take a chance with something like this is to throw that Dodger stack in a small dollar amount GPP. Put $1 or $2 or $5, depending on your bankroll, and throw it in there. And this way, if the game does go off and everybody else was scared away from it, you'll be one of the few people who's sitting on a Dodger stack that is obviously in a very good position tonight and would be highly owned if the weather wasn't an issue. So you might wind up getting the best bats on the night at a really low ownership compared to what they should be. And that's basically the way that I would handle that game tonight. So again, that's just our teaching point for today. Something I want you guys to keep in mind, because that Dodger-Colorado game is going to be a little bit dicey up until lineups lock. So you got to make sure that you're following it. Follow RotoCurve over on Twitter or come into the chat room. I'm sure everybody's going to be talking about it as it gets closer to it. So moving on from there, some of the other games that popped out at me when I was looking at the Vegas lines, you have Minnesota and Boston, which is a matchup between Trevor May and Rick Porcello. Porcello's a -156 favorite today, and it's a 9-run total game. So they're expecting those Boston bats to do some damage against May. May has given up a .315 batting average to left-handed batters so far this year. So you got to think that guys like Ortiz, Brock Holt, Pablo Sandoval, all those guys are in play. And, the Red Sox stack is probably also in play, because guys like Pedroia and guys like Hanley Ramirez, while they're not left-handed batters, they're two of the right-handed batters that tend to hit right-handed pitching better than a lot of other people do. With Pedroia, you get the average. With Hanley, you get the upside for home runs. And, with those two guys being eligible at second base and shortstop up the middle, the Red Sox stack is another one that's going to be in play today. Obviously, everybody's going to be rolling out the Dodgers stack if that game goes. So you might be able to get another stack that's in a good position, at a little bit of a lower ownership rate here. Excuse me for a second. And that actually brings us to the next game and the first pitcher I want to discuss on the day. That's the San Diego game against the New York Mets at San Diego. I think James Shields is probably one of my favorite options today at starting pitching. He's a -143 favorite, and the run total in that game is only 6.5. Basically, Shields is a little bit below the top options tonight. 9,300 on FanDuel, 9,400 on DraftKings. You got other guys that are up in the 10K range, so you're getting a little bit of a discount on them. But what I really like about him is when I started digging into the numbers a little bit. The New York Mets have a 19.8% strikeout rate, which puts them basically right in the middle of the pack. So they're basically league average when it comes to strikeouts. But they do have the 26th worst batting average against right-handed pitching. So this is definitely a good matchup for Shields. The game's being played in Petco Park, which is obviously a great pitcher's park and a place where he pitches well. So he's going to have a good upside there. And again, he's a big favorite and a really low run total game. Shields, what was surprising to me is Shields actually has the second highest strikeout per 9-inning rate of any pitcher in Major League Baseball this year at 11.59. So you're getting a high strikeout guy going in his home park, which is very pitcher friendly, doesn't give up a lot of hits. So there's really not a lot of negatives for him, and there's a lot more on the positives on the upside. The run total's low, so he probably shouldn't give up a lot of runs there. The one thing that I will say is a little bit of a drawback with Shields is he doesn't pitch as deep into the game as some of the other studs above him. He's more of a guy who usually goes about 7 innings, whereas some of the guys like a Corey Kluber has basically been going, 7 innings as a floor for him lately with, complete game as its upside and 8 innings as its norm. So you're going to be getting probably 1 less inning there, which also means 3 less opportunities to get strikeouts. But at the same point in time, in a good matchup today at a little bit of a discounted price, I think Shields is probably my favorite pitcher to roll out there in cash games. And again, as Rath was mentioning this morning, at his price of only 93, you can roll out one of those 10K pitchers with him and still keep your pitching under 20K on a day and put together a decent lineup that doesn't include a lot of, doesn't include a ton of those cheap options. You might have to throw 1 or 2 in there to make it work. But again, if you're getting a good floor, good safety from your pitching, it might be worth it to do it in your cash games today. The next game I wanted to mention, the Vegas lines, is Cincinnati at Philly. That game is a -7 run total with Cole Hamels as a -140 favorite over Mike Leake. Now, Hamels is probably my second favorite pitcher on the day today. And again, he's got a pretty solid price as well. He's below 10K on FanDuel. He's about 10K on DraftKings. So, his price is up there, but it's not restrictive where you can't get him in there. It's not like Scherzer was yesterday at 12,000 where you needed to take either, a really cheap option at pitcher to go with him, or you had to, get a couple really cheap bats that you might not have been too happy with. Against Cincy has an 18.8% strikeout rate, which is not very high. It's basically a little bit below league average, but they are only hitting .237 against left-handed pitching, which is 24th in the league right now. On that Cincy team, when you look through who hits well against left-handed pitching, they really only have 4 guys who are even hitting over 250 against lefties. So you got guys like Brandon Phillips is 290. You have Frazier and Votto are about 275 each. And both of the catchers, Pena and Barnhart, are over 280. But again, they're both at the same position. So at most, you're going to have 4 guys in that lineup that hit over 250. Hamels has been really, really good lately. In his last 3 starts, he's one of those guys that's basically been getting 8 innings. He's been giving up 1 or 2 runs. He gave up 1 run twice, gave up 2 runs in the other game. He's only been giving up about 6 to 7 base runners as a max, so he's not even giving up a walk or hit per inning. And he finishes with about 7 strikeouts, so just shy of a strikeout per inning as well. Again, he has a pretty high K rate at 9.2 per 9 innings, so it's not elite like Shields is, but it's still pretty much up there. That's why I said I like Shields a little bit better because I think he's got more strikeout upside. But again, I don't think this is a particularly tough matchup for Hamels either. So he's another guy I'm going to be rolling out there. Rath mentioned it this morning, and I already was writing it up as well. In a 2-pitcher site, if you put those 2 guys like on the DraftKings together, that's a pretty formidable pairing for your cash games today. And you should have a really nice floor, get about 30, I'm going to say maybe 25 to 35 points out of both of them, end up around 55 to 60, and probably only need to get about another 60 out of your bats in order to be above those cash lines. So 2 of the guys that I like today a lot are Shields and Hamels. I think they're 2 guys that you should be rolling out. On FanDuel, where they're close in price, I think I lean a little bit more towards Shields, saving that $600, and I think he's got a little bit more upside for the win, and probably a little bit of a better chance to limit those Mets bats. Moving on to another game that we like, we're going to look and talk about the Chicago White Sox versus Texas game. Chris Sale is another guy who I think a lot of people are going to be looking at. He was dominant in his last outing. It looks like he's back to the Chris Sale that we know and love from last year. But he's in a high run total game at 8.5 and is only a -130 favorite in it. So basically they're expecting him to give up a couple runs. That Texas offense has been pretty hot. It seems like they're calling up a new young bat every day who's, hitting the ball out of the park. Yesterday it was Joey Gallo's turn. I think he's a lefty though, so I don't think they'll play him today against Sale. But again, he wasn't in most of the pools yesterday. I think the only place you could use him was on aces. But if you were one of the lucky people who had him in your lineup, he had a real big day for you. Sale has, let's see, Texas has a 20.2% K rate, so they're right around the middle for league average. And they're actually 10th best batting average against left-handed pitching with a 265. So if you're going to get Sale with a 265 batting average against them, it's not going to be a simple matchup for him. But again, I mean, he's very good. He is a dominant pitcher. He has the 10.07 strikeout per 9 inning rate. So it's pretty much up there. It's pretty high. But again, Texas isn't a team that strikes out a ton. So as you can tell, I'm kind of on the fence about this. There are some good things and some bad things with it. Basically, what has pushed me off of Sale is the fact that his price is pretty high. And in order for him to pay that off, you're really going to need him to do pretty well with it. Moving on down, we have, a guy that Rath really likes in Liriano, 4th highest K per 9. But he also has the highest walk per 9 of all these stud pitchers that are up there today. He's only allowed a 189 batting average to opposition this year. So he's definitely somebody who I think is in play. Rath mentioned San Francisco struggles a little bit at home. So Liriano is the favorite in a -115 game on the road with a run total of only 7. So he's another guy I think you can use and play on all the sites for me today. Rath mentioned Hector Santiago. He's been lights out recently, 7,100 on DraftKings. And in 6 of his last 9 games, he scored at least 21 fantasy points. So that would be 3 points per 1,000. Tampa Bay has a 254 batting average, which is 17th in the league versus left-handed pitching. And they have a 23.2% strikeout rate, which is above average towards the tops in the league. I think it's about 7th or 8th overall against left-handed pitching. So as a -130 favorite in a 7.5 run game, I'm going to agree with Rath here. I think we can recommend Hector Santiago as a great cost-saving option for you. The last guy I wanted to mention is Lance McCullers. McCullers plays Baltimore. He's got a 22.4% strikeout rate, which is the 4th highest against right-handed pitching. Basically, they've struck out 71 times in the last 7 games, so they're averaging 10 strikeouts a game. McCullers is not a guy who pitches deep. Hopefully today he can get you 6 innings. He is a high strikeout guy, though, so if he gets you 6 innings, there's a good chance he's going to wind up with 6 or 7 Ks for you as well. So that basically breaks down the Vegas lines and the pitching that we see, all the stuff that stood out for us. We're going to go on and give you guys some hitters that we like, guys that we're looking at in good spots. And remember today, I mean, the Dodgers are in the best spot, but you got to be sure that game goes off. And if it does go off, there's a lot of guys in that lineup that we're going to mention that you should use. The first amongst those is Yasmani Grandal. Now, basically, here's the deal. If you're playing on DraftKings, I don't think Grandal is in play. And the reason for that is he's 4,800. So basically, if you want Grandal in your lineup, you're going to have to sacrifice, other guys you can get for around that price tag. Bryce Harper, Miguel Cabrera, Stanton, Tulo. These are the guys that you would have to be giving up on to put a Grandal in your lineup. Now, I like him. I think he's got a good matchup. I think he's a solid guy, but I don't think he has huge upside. I don't think he's going to hit 2 home runs for me today. And if I had to choose between using Yasmani Grandal or any of the other guys I just mentioned, I don't even really think it's much of a choice. Now, I know he's playing in Coors. I know that's going to help him out. But again, I'm just going to say it this way. Do you want Yasmani Grandal or do you want to line up with Stanton and Harper and Miggy and Tulo or one of those guys instead? Because at the $4,800 price tag on DraftKings, that's basically the choice that you're making is fading those guys to make sure you have Grandal in your lineup. And amongst those 5 guys, I don't think Grandal has a high probability of being the highest scorer out of those 5 on most days. Even most days when he's playing in Coors Field. Now, if you're playing over on FanDuel, though, he's only 3,300. So over on FanDuel, I definitely think he's somebody in play. I don't think he's too expensive today. I think he's somebody that you want to get into your lineup. Like I said, I think he's a good play. Left-handed bat going up against a weak right-handed pitcher in Coors Field. It basically writes itself. You guys don't need me to figure out why he's somebody you should be looking at. If you're playing on DraftKings, though, the guy who I think I'm going to be using a lot at catcher today is Carlos Santana. He's still catcher eligible, and he's the right-handed batter who goes up against Jason Vargas. Now, Vargas actually, his batting average against left-handers is actually a little bit higher than it is against right-handers, but all the power that he gives up is to right-handed bats. He gave up 17 home runs to right-handed bats in each of the last 2 years, and so far he's given up 4 homers to right-handed bats in the first 22 innings of work this season. So if you're looking for a catcher-eligible guy, I think Carlos Santana, who's still catcher-eligible on DraftKings, is somebody I'd roll out. He's cheaper than Grandal, so it doesn't make any sense to me to use a guy who I think is a worse hitter. He usually hits number 2 in that order against left-handed pitching. And again, he's got that home run upside and multiple hits. He can score some runs. He can knock some runs in. And, at a weak catching position, he's really a guy that you want to look at. Some of the usual suspects, guys like Stephen Vogt, don't really have great matchups today. So on DraftKings, I think you look at Santana. On FanDuel, I think you want to look towards Grandal if that game goes off. Obviously, Adrian Gonzalez is another guy who's going to be in play for the Dodgers at first base. His price is bumped up everywhere. He's 5,400 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. Again, we don't got to keep talking about the same matchup. You guys know how good he is against right-handed pitching. Coors Field, excellent thing. If it goes off, he's definitely somebody that you want to look at. But again, the good thing is, and the bad thing is, with the weather, he might be a little bit lower owned. But again, if that game is going to get canceled or is, might not go, you really can't use him over on FanDuel and take that chance that the biggest bat in your lineup is going to get you at 0. Another guy who I still love is Anthony Rizzo. Rizzo has some amazing advanced stats, and that's why I don't mind recommending him and rolling him out almost every day. He has one of the highest base on balls per 9 and one of the lowest K rates amongst all the first basemen, and especially the expensive first baseman option that people want to use every day. He also has one of the highest batting averages, which satisfies the guys who don't use the advanced stats to look at it. So he basically clicks off all the boxes, no matter what kind of stat geek you are. In 145 at bats so far this year, he's batting .290 with 8 home runs, 10 doubles, and 2 triples. So he basically has 20 extra base hits and 147 at bats. Basically 1 every 7 at bats, he gets an extra base hit, and he has an on-base percentage over 400. So there's a lot to like here with Rizzo. He's got a safe floor. You can use him in your cash games, and he also has that upside. As we know, he can hit some home runs. I kind of like his matchup today. I'm not sold on Dan Herron. I don't think Dan Herron is a great pitcher. I think he's kind of been outperforming, what he is to this point in time. So I'm expecting some regression from him today, and I think that those Cubs bats can get to him and put up a couple runs. Again, and Rizzo is hitting at the top of that lineup too, so he does have the chance for that extra at bat, which is so coveted. For me today, those are the guys that I'm probably going to be using. I think today is a day where you have to pay up at first base. There's a couple first base options that are in really good spots, so I don't think it's a day where you want to go dumpster diving and try to find a cheap option. If you don't pay up at first base today, I think you're going to leave too much work for your lineup to do. So, like I said, if that game goes off, Adrian Gonzalez, if you can fit him, you want him in your lineup. If not, I'm a big fan of Anthony Rizzo. But I think one of those top first basemen is going to have such a big day today that you don't want to be looking down at any of the cheap options. At second base, there's really only one guy I'm using, and that's Dee Gordon. I think he's pretty cheap on DraftKings. His price is down to $4,300, which for him is pretty cheap. And on FanDuel, he's pretty reasonable at $3,500, although I think you could probably go down and find some cheaper options. That is a little expensive, and as we said, his skill set actually translates better when you're playing over on DraftKings. He's hitting .340 so far against left-handed pitching this year, and surprisingly, John Lester is also giving up a .340 average to left-handed batters this year. Basically, even last year, John Lester actually let left-handed batters hit him a little better than right-handed batters, so there's a chance that Dee Gordon on top of that lineup could get on base more than one time today. Lester's already allowed 12 stolen bases this year, and Josh has mentioned a couple times in the past how Lester is a guy who has no move to first base. His move to first base is weak, so guys are able to steal on him pretty well. So if Dee Gordon gets on, I definitely think there's a good chance that he's going to be off to the races at some point. And again, with Dee Gordon, and especially with his price down at $4,300 on DraftKings, if he gets you a single or if he walks and he steals a base and then somebody knocks him in to score a run, well, he's at cash game value for you in one at bat. And again, with me thinking he might be able to get on base multiple times today, if he can get on 2 times and do that twice, or even if the second time he gets on, he just gets a single and gets stranded, he's going to wind up with 13 or 14 DraftKings points for you. And that's going to be really good value for only $4,300 from a tough to fill second base position. Moving on to third base. Third base is something I wanted to discuss with you guys because there's really nobody who stands out. There's a lot of tough matchups altogether. Just to run down a few of them, you got Nolan Arenado against Bolsinger. Bolsinger's been pretty good so far, and it's righty on righty. You got Miggy against Gray. Gray's been very good. Chris Davis, who smashes at home but isn't the same guy on the road, so you got to take him down a little bit. You got Chris Bryant against Herron. Herron has a 190 batting average allowed to right-handed batters this year. So as much as we all love Chris Bryant, that's not really a good matchup as well. Probably the second best matchup on the day to me is Todd Frazier going up against Cole Hamels. Frazier's hitting .292 versus left-handed pitching with 5 home runs and 48 at-bats. Citizens Bank Park is a good park to hit in. But if you look through the numbers, he actually doesn't do very well against Cole. It's a small sample size for BBP, but in 9 at-bats, he only has 2 hits, and he struck out 4 times. So it's not a ton of upside that you're getting with Frazier today, and it could go either way. So I don't think he's safe enough for cash. Maybe he's got some upside in a tournament for you. But, again, Hamels has been pitching really well, so it's definitely not a good spot for him either. The guy who I think I probably like the most is Josh Donaldson. I usually want to use him against left-handed pitching, but other third basemen aren't all that great today. And I was surprised when I looked at his numbers. So far this year against right-handed pitching, he's hitting .282 with 10 doubles and 11 home runs in 170 at-bats. So there's nothing to sneeze at there. I mean, those are some pretty good numbers. He's hitting for a decent average. He's hitting with a lot of power against him. So in a good matchup that he has here today, I definitely think that he's a guy that could get some hits, especially against that young rookie that that Washington's throwing at him. Moving on from here at shortstop, on DraftKings, I'm going to be using Hanley Ramirez where I can afford him. I know he has the second highest, price over there, but he also has the second highest total in his game today, and his team has the second highest projected team total. In 50 innings versus right-handed pitching, May has allowed a .290 average with an ERA that's nearing 8. So right-handed pitchers have been hitting them. They've been driving in runs. They've been getting on base. It's basically been pretty easy. Hanley already has 8 homers and 136 at-bats against right-handers, and he's still batting cleanup in that order. He's still probably the highest upside shortstop along with Tulo. So if you're looking for a high upside play today on DraftKings, he's the guy I'm going to be using. Over on FanDuel, I think that the guy that I like the best is probably Jose Reyes. He gets that rookie Taylor Jordan that we just mentioned. He's 3,500. Him and Rollins are probably going to be 2 of the guys that are highly used. Rollins had 2 really big upside games of 17 and 21 on DraftKings in his last 3. But I just don't really like Rollins as much as I like Reyes. And over on FanDuel, they're only a $200 difference. I just think Reyes at this point in his career is a better player. So he probably has better upside. And I think he's got just as good a matchup against the rookie where I think he can do some damage today. So over on FanDuel, I'm probably going to be rolling with Reyes. Where I can afford to on DraftKings, I'm going to be going with Hanley. And if I have to come down, a guy like Reyes makes a lot of sense to me. On DraftKings, I also wanted to point out to you guys, Ruben Tejada is still $2,300 too. He does get a tough matchup against James Shields today. But again, if he's hitting in the 2-hole, just go look at his game logs and see the numbers he's been putting up at 2,300. Basically, if he walks and steals second base, he makes value for you. So he's somebody that I think you got to keep an eye on, even though the matchup's not great. Moving on to outfield today, which is, the last thing we want to talk about. Jock Peterson's absolutely on fire. He's got home runs in his last 4 games. He's got the lefty-righty split today against a bad pitcher in a great hitter's park. He's going to be leading off, so he gets the extra at-bat, especially with them being the road team. I mean, if that game goes off and you got the money to pay up for him, you can't argue with how well this guy's been hitting or how good a matchup he has today. So while I can't, say he's going to hit a 5th home run in a row, I definitely think that he's somebody you got to keep in mind. I really like Ryan Rayburn today as well, going up against the left-hander and Vargas. Usually when they face a left-hander, you're going to find Rayburn in the 4th or 5th spot in that Indians order. And again, he's one of those cheap options you could put in your lineup today that has the home run upside, has shown that he's going to be smashing against left-handed pitching, and allows you to fit in some of the other studs that you really want to get in your lineup. Stanton is another guy who smashes left-handed pitching. The matchup with Lester is not really ideal, but Stanton is hitting 300 with 4 home runs and 30 at-bats in 2015 against left-handed pitching. I think that Lester's going to try to pitch around him today, even though Lester is tough on right-handed batters. But again, if some of those guys in front of him, like Dee Gordon, are able to get on base, if Lester's a little bit too worried about them and leaves one up in the strike zone, we all know what Stanton can do with a mistake pitch. So I definitely think that Stanton, the way he hits against left-handed pitching, is somebody that I'm going to have on my tournament rosters. If the left-hander was a little bit worse than a John Lester, I might even be able to recommend him highly in cash. But I will probably only play him in cash if I have to come off of Jock Peterson because that game gets canceled. And again, probably mostly on DraftKings where they're about the same price. There was one other outfielder I wanted to mention today, and that's Billy Burns. If you're looking for a price-saving option, he's 3,300 on DraftKings, which I think is really good for him. He's 3,300 on FanDuel too, though, which I think is a little bit high. But basically, he's been averaging 4 points over his last 7 games on FanDuel, and he's been averaging 12.3 points per game over his last 10 on DraftKings. And his price is still below down there. I mean, this is a leadoff batter who's basically getting you the kind of return that you expect out of power hitters, guys like Harper, guys like Stanton, that average 10, 12 points a game. And you're getting that from a leadoff hitter who only costs $3,300. He's got a good matchup today. Sanchez is a little bit worse against left-handed batters. Again, it's not ideal. Sanchez isn't horrible against them. He's got about a 240 batting average against left-handers, but they do have a little bit of a higher whip, so he is letting them get on base a little more. But either way, I mean, even with the tough matchup, I still think Burns is my favorite cheap saving option. Him and Rayburn are the guys that you're really going to want to look at to round out those rosters with the cheap bats that you need at the bottom of those lineups. So let's get into it today. Which direction are we going, and what am I going to be doing to build my lineups around? I think James Shields is a guy I'm going to be building a lot of lineups around tonight on all the sites. He's probably the guy I'm going to roll out on one pitcher sites. Again, he's got the elite K per 9, and he's going up against a pretty weak offense in a great pitcher's park. He's got the lowest run total on the day, and he's one of the bigger favorites at minus 140 or minus 145, depending on where you look at it. He's also a little bit cheaper, so you're saving a couple bucks on him. So I think he's got the right combination of everything together for you to roll him out in your cash games today. And I also think he has upside for those tournaments as well. Now, if you're gonna use him, I think you can pair him with a guy like a Cole Hamels. I also really like Francisco Liriano. I didn't talk much today about Kluber and Sale. Kluber's got a tough matchup against Kansas City, who has the lowest strikeout rate in the league at, I think it's under 17% at this point. And again, we mentioned Sale and the high total in that game as well. So those are two guys that I'm going to be shying away from that I think are going to be highly owned. Hoping I make the right decisions with them tonight. So on my two pitcher sites, you're going to see a lot of Shields. You're probably going to see some Hamels, and you're going to see a little bit of Liriano sprinkled in there as well. I think those are the three guys you want to concentrate on. Now, again, in order to do that, you're going to need a couple cheap bats. Some of the guys that I mentioned, guys like Burns and Rayburn in the outfield, they're going to be some of the guys who I use heavily. There's a couple other guys that I really want to try to make sure I get in my lineup. Carlos Santana when I'm playing over on DraftKings. Yasmani Grandal is a guy I'm going to be using over on FanDuel. They give you a little bit of salary relief and let you get some of those other guys in there. I know Josh Donaldson's not going up against a lefty tonight, but again, he's another one of those guys I think you really want to have in your lineup. At shortstop, I'm going to be spending up a little bit today, so second base is probably going to be the place where I have to wind up saving a little. But we'll see. As you say, you always got to see those rosters when they come out. See if there's somebody in the lineup. If you can get a guy like Kiki Hernandez again today, he's going to be in a solid matchup. You want to make sure you roll those guys out there to give you the savings that you need. So that's going to wrap up our show for today. Obviously, it's a little bit of an abbreviated one, but we tried to hit on all the major points that we always get to with you guys. Again, we'll be back here on Friday, June 5th for another episode of The Curve. Be ready to check us out over at rotocurve.com. Make sure you follow us at RotoCurve over on Twitter. We also have a Facebook page up as well. And if you're looking for some more advice and when it's coming time to lineup blocks, if you have some tough decisions, hop over on. We're always over there in the chat before the games and after the show today. And also make sure you check out the forums. There's a lot of good posts. We have a lot of good players who play a lot over here at RotoCurve. And they try to give you their insight as well. So you have some different viewpoints and some different ways to think about things. And hopefully together we can all make some money. So as we always say here at RotoCurve, stay classy, DFS, and you guys have a good day.